What's happening with this weather? I haven't seen Nadia. I haven't seen you in forever.
Yeah, I went in hiding as soon as the pandemic hit. I just went under
Well, I'm glad you're out again.
virtually. Yeah, I'm still in the same place, but yeah, we're just kind of huddling, and we've been doing so much at this point. COVID's been a blessing in disguise, I guess.
Yeah, right. I'm looking at it in the same way. So
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
taught all of us to be efficiently virtual, which is beautiful
Right.
for people like me with conditions. So I'm not really, too down about it.
Yeah, it's all right. I know. Hey, there's always positives, right?
The environmental aspect is just amazing because used to I used to use this app to log how much carbon I was emitting from my travels, and this year it's like a few kilograms. Previous years it's like tons and tons from me flying to Europe and all over the world, and I feel a lot better from an environmental perspective now.
We can see it even in the world, how the globe is reacting.
Yeah.
I know.
Our skies are a lot bluer, although I'm not sure how long that's lasting because our traffic is getting bad. But we just shut down again. So
Where are you?
California, the Bay Area.
California shut down again?
Yeah, so we all went, I think 41 counties, pretty much most of the state went to purple, which is our color on no more indoor dining, no more whatever. So,
Wow.
right. Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think it'd last this long. But
hey, good morning. This is Uday Shukla. How are you all doing?
good. Uday, you're going to moderate today, right?
Yes. I think we're at time.
Are we?
So, I think so. 11:20.
Jocelyn, are you?
Or 1 minute in.
Okay. All right. So we have till 12:05, and so let's kind of go through, introduce everybody. The title is Commercialization of Orphan Drugs: Top Issues Facing the Community Today. So in terms of a format for this panel, why don't we go ahead and introduce yourselves? Take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, and give a few words as to how you're involved in the orphan drug space, rare disease space. So let me start with you, Christine.
Okay, so Christine von Reisfeld. I am a patient myself. I've been a patient since I was a kid. I'm involved in the rare disease space just kind of by accident. I had been speaking out about my personal experiences. I like to tell people I've had a health history that is a series of unfortunate events, and everything that could have gone wrong in healthcare pretty much did for me. And so now I'm in this space trying to make it better for others, but at the same time trying to be self-sufficient as an individual living on Social Security disability. So started my own nonprofit to break down some of the silos that I've seen in healthcare as I've gone from conference to conference, and maybe just invoke some conversations on some out-of-the-box thinking that we all need.
All right, thank you. Nadia?
Hi, so yes, I'm Nadia Bodkin. I have the honor of speaking with all of you today on behalf of the Rare Advocacy Movement, which I am a founding member of. I'm also the CEO for Blaze Therapeutics, and I'm a founding member for New Love Ventures. And by way of education, I am a PharmD and with an MS in genetics, but that's not what got me into the orphan drug and rare disease space. I'm actually, in fact, a rare person as well as Christine. I myself have 3 rare genetic conditions. And as a result of those 3 combined into one body, I have epilepsy. I live with chronic pain. I require braces in order to walk safely. Sometimes there are days that I can't actually walk. But regardless, regardless of my education and regardless of the impact that the rare disease has on my body, I'm not stopping. And so that's actually what's kind of motivated myself in the rare disease space to get involved.
Thank you, Nadia. Sam?
Hi everyone, Sam Lucas here from in Boston. Sorry I can't be with you all in person. I was looking forward to it. I'm Senior Vice President of Expanded Access Programs at Unifar Group, which includes Durban as a particular company. And what I look after in this company is expanded access program, compassionate use, early access initiatives, and I work with clients, small sponsors right up to large pharmaceutical organizations to develop really robust, efficient, and scalable expanded access solutions for their rare and orphan drug products. So I'm an expert I've been doing this every day of my career for the last 10 years, expanded access, and I'm a big advocate for early and expanded access. My own brother, his life has been significantly changed through an access program. In fact, it completely turned around from almost suicide to a really good quality life. So I'm a big advocate for this, and I have planned and implemented around 70 access programs in pretty much every disease area of the world. So that's what I bring to the conversation.
All right, thank you, Sam. Crystal?
Hi, I'm Crystal Davis, and I joined the rare disease community back in 2011 when doctors diagnosed our newborn son, Hunter, with spinal muscular atrophy type 1. When left untreated, SMA is the leading genetic cause of death for infants. And we were told that there was no treatment, no hope, just to take Hunter home and enjoy what time we had left with him, which doctors expected to be about 3 months. We couldn't accept that. We worked fast and furiously. And just 8 weeks later, Hunter was the first patient in the world treated for SMA in an N of 1 trial in Mexico. We commercially manufactured the treatment in the United States, took it to Mexico. So it's a reverse Dallas Buyers Club story. I then participated in a meeting at the FDA in 2016 and helped the first treatment for SMA be approved over 2 years earlier. And since then, I have been an advocate really working to move the needle to access to rare disease treatments. I saw what we achieved in just 8 short weeks, and I know that we can move these treatments to the rare disease community much faster and improve access for those treatments.
And full disclosure, Crystal, I worked at Biogen at the time and was responsible for helping plan and implement the spinal muscular atrophy program for Spinraza. So just full disclosure there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Hunter actually crossed over from his N of 1 trial in Mexico, which actually grew to an N of 3 trial, and participated as one of the first patients treated in the Spinraza EAP. So thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Kristen?
Well, I am at the cool kids table listening to you guys talk about all the stuff that you've accomplished. That's cool. I'm Kristen Smedley, the co-founder and CEO at the Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation, which is the patient organization for CRB1, LCA-RP, very rare blindness, which 2 of my 3 kids have, my 2 boys, Michael and Mitchell, which is how I became the accidental advocate, the accidental CEO, the accidental testifying at the FDA on behalf of the first ever gene therapy for an inherited disease, Luxturna. Luxturna doesn't actually help my boys at all per se, or any of the CRB1 patients. It did open the door for a ton of us, right, to come through for gene therapy. And my role at that FDA AdCom meeting wasn't even to talk about the science of it, was to talk about the cost of not having a therapy to the general community. And the reason for that is I was privy to some information a couple of years ago where a payer said, there's no way we would ever pay for a cure for blindness because blindness doesn't cost us anything. And it was one of the worst sentences other than your son is blind that I had ever heard. So I do a lot of work now to educate on the cost of blindness. And interestingly enough, that testimony turned into an op-ed in The Hill, and it is now an international study that was just conducted by Retina International to see what the cost of blindness is. So I bring to the table some different thoughts on cost, access, and whatnot. So thanks for having me today.
Well, thank you. And that's a really good segue into the first kind of topic that we wanted to kind of get your views on. And that is the requirements of commercial success. So requirements of commercial success, is it the cost that you're saving through a therapy that treats a rare disease? Is it some other factor? So let me start with Christine.
Sorry, unmuting myself. So the question, the cost, what's the question again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, what are some of the requirements to drive commercial success of a rare disease therapy? Is it taking the argument that, hey, this will cost so much if left untreated, or this is the quality of life that will impact? What are some of those requirements that really resonate, whether it's with a payer, providers, governmental bodies that you see?
Well, I think basically for me and for a lot of people, it's that quality of life, right? And the cost does come into that as well. I think that so many things that we put money into are just wasted costs, right? We just had Dr. Marks talk about pharmacogenomics and some of these trials, right? And originally putting that into the trial to do a more tailored trial, which is something that I see as a benefit, right? I've had my pharmacogenomics done as part of a precision medicine initiative. And I've learned how that I metabolize drugs differently. So the cost associated with the wrong drugs that I've taken have actually accumulated to more than I would be dealing with if it was the disease alone. So I have 3 joint replacements, which will require additional joint replacements. Right. I've got brain, damage that requires the cognitive therapy. So all of these different things are playing into that cost. So I think, early on, maybe solving some of these issues and looking at these in a different way that, and get that buy-in from everybody. I think a huge thing is just getting that commitment of everybody and that whole desire of where we're going together.
Okay, thank you. And Nadia, what is your view?
So I come from several different perspectives because I'm also in therapeutic development. So it actually depends on your perspective. I'm a rare disease patient myself, so I understand the impact of not having a treatment and just treating symptoms. And so there is a huge cost to payers when you do not treat the actual root cause of a condition. But that's obviously in rare disease, most of us do not have those options. And so when you're looking at it from a actual commercial standpoint from the manufacturer side, it's the amount of money that we lose from not understanding the insights from the community, unadulterated insights. There's so much that we lose when we have to submit amendments to clinical trials. Each clinical trial amendment costs over $500,000. And each clinical trial averages 2.2 amendments. And that's each per phase. So it really adds up to several million per trial that we lose because we do not have the insights from the community that are clear. And so each rare disease community is different. And so we can't generalize what's going to save us money. We actually have to do landscape analysis. We have to understand each community, the large ones versus the small ones, in regards to how we measure rare diseases, because compared to the rest of the world, we're all small. However, in rare disease, we do have large communities compared to the few that are only 6 in the world. And so it requires understanding which community you're going to utilize for your indication.
No, that's a really good point. And from a manufacturer point of view, they're looking for, I'm investing X amount of dollars. How many patients are there? How much money can I charge? They're looking at the financial picture. So they have a view and they have a decision process that they go through. And many times in my past life, we used to help them find the diagnosed and undiagnosed patients. But I see your point as to what is the impetus for the manufacturer to continue, and they should be able to reach out to the patient community groups to understand the true patient journey and to get that detailed patient journey so they understand what the etiology is, what the mechanisms are, and so forth. That's really good. Thank you.
Because you have to negotiate with the payers. And in order to negotiate with payers, you have to understand the impact, the true cost of the disease untreated. And then you take that and you also look at the landscape analysis, the real landscape analysis of the socioeconomic situation of the majority of your patients. and you create programs and you work with the
Yes.
advocacy community to create community-based programs that can actually then allow you to turn a profit so that you can make that next therapeutic product.
Yeah. Good, very good. Sam.
Yes, thank you. So coming at this from a sort of hopefully a balanced perspective, in that I'm an advocate for expanded access and patients with rare diseases. I've worked in a large pharmaceutical company planning the access program and a vendor that operationalizes them for many different companies around the world. I see this as it's a big, well, we all know, and the unfortunate matter of fact is, pharmaceutical companies, like you mentioned, will only develop a product if there's a viable market for it, right? And there, to the other points that have been mentioned there, quality of life is not always important to a payer. It's very variable by country. So, for example, the UK, where I'm from, they have a quality-based system, a scoring system for assessment of reimbursement. Now, we faced this example with SMA. The UK was very late. In fact, they were later than Colombia to reimburse Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy. They're one of the largest economies in the world. That's really quite crazy, isn't it? And that's because their scoring system for how you determine the value for a product is different, and it doesn't apply to all therapies, right? And that's why you can't even apply the same scoring system to all rare diseases or rare oncology, because everything is so different. One might be, ability to, have increased activities of daily life or quality of life. One might be motor function, but the two don't necessarily correlate. And what's important to that individual country? Is it a reduction in cost savings for that healthcare system, whether it be a social security funded like National Health Service or an insurance-based system? The difference between the US and the rest of the world is incredible. You cannot put them in the same bucket. The US, with basically almost automatic reimbursement for therapies with very little regard essentially to the quality of the data or efficacy, is entirely different. It's 100% different from Europe, where they have a completely different perspective to this. So the challenge, I would say, is that for a pharmaceutical company, and the great shame for patients with rare diseases is, or the general rule is, you're going to get access to a therapy, hopefully, if there's a market for the product, and you're only going to get access in a country if you're wealthy and you have fair skin. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world, because companies will not provide, give the product away at a lower price that jeopardizes their international price in countries where they're less economically developed. So those are some of the challenges I see. Is that, and then what do you get out of the data from the clinical trials that can then be translated into value for individual countries, bearing in mind that every country has different assessments of what's important or valuable to them.
Yeah, interesting. And I think when you look at the market space that a manufacturer looks at is, how many patients do I get now? How many patients do I have in the future? What can I charge? What is my reimbursement profile that I can kind of qualify or quantify? So, for example, we've had clients where, for children in the U.S., they immediately go on Medicaid, and so that would drive their revenue profiles in the coming years. So you're right to state that it is very money driven and financially driven. And then in the UK, the example you gave, although very, to lack of a better term, is devastating, where they look at what quality of life based on their metrics that they have established, not necessarily a parent's view or parent's metrics, which is very hard to accept. Thank you. And I want to move on to Crystal.
Yeah, so when Spinraza was approved, we really celebrated, and we found out that our work was absolutely not done, because approval does not ensure access and reimbursement. So since that time, in going to ICER and discussing with payers and manufacturers, I've gone and had some conversations with Dr. Woodcock, and really tried to stress the need for data across the disease spectrum that a treatment intends to treat. Now, we understand that there does need to be that robust data to prove efficacy, but there also needs to be trial data from other patients that will look to access the treatment. And so then we started seeing that being done, but they weren't done contemporaneously. So then you would have that robust data making the label packet upon approval, and then the other data would not come in. So I do know that the FDA does now have internal trainings on this, and that they are actually talking to the manufacturers when they are setting up the trials and bringing this home, because it really doesn't do a lot of good to have approved therapies if the members in the rare disease communities cannot access them.
Right, right. Very good point. Kristen?
So I could spin us down a really bad rabbit hole, and I'll try not to, in the circus of inherited retinal diseases. Because here's the thing. I mean, you've heard me say it before probably a bunch of times when designing the whole clinical trial and the outcomes for Luxturna. You know, everybody, of course, thinks that the number one thing that a blind patient wants is to be able to read that eye chart. And that is not what came back when I think it was Nadia that touched on talking to the patient community and what is it that you really want. It's independence and mobility are the top two for the blind community that they wanted back for those that had lost it, and they wanted it in the first place for those that had never had it. So that, you know, is one thing to consider. If we were waiting on perfect science to get to read the eye chart, Luxturna wouldn't even be here, right? You know, and you talk to the patients that have had Luxturna, they are, not all of them can read the eye chart, but man, to be able to see you hear Christian talk about being able to see the moon. It's life-changing for him and the things that he can do. So it's, you know, again, it's about what is meaningful for patients, but then there's this whole other animal out there about in terms of access. My two boys, for a lot of their lives, have said they don't need a cure, a treatment, because they are so empowered. They have all the access to the tools that they need to live as blind people that they're good to go for the most part. But in this, just looking at the United States alone, not many people in the blind community have the access to tools and resources to thrive with blindness and the quality of life that my boys had. So there's a huge disparity there. So the world is not ready for people that are thriving with blindness, you know, so the treatments and cures are necessary so that they're not held back because of our biases, our perceptions, are not getting the tools and resources to them. So there's just so many different things at play. And I already touched on in my initial thing about what does it cost to a system that with a 70% unemployment rate in our community. I mean, that's a big cost. So a couple different things there.
And a couple of points there. In our work in the IRD space a few years ago, you know, one of the issues we found is that the patients fall out of the system. And they fall out of the system because basically they're told to go get help at a state and local level to figure out how to live with the loss of vision. And we need to keep them in the system so you can track and understand how many patients are there, where are they in their patient journey, and how do you quickly get the appropriate therapy to them. So we spent some time understanding that process, understanding how to target those patients when they fell out of the system. So I think that's another aspect that we have to kind of collect that community and be able to reach out to every member of that community.
Right.
So thank you.
Right.
So next question is, topic is, given your experience and given what you've seen in the market and in this rare disease space, what are some of the innovations that are coming down the line in the next, I would say, 3 to 5 years that would have an impact or that would change or disrupt in a beneficial manner how rare diseases or therapies are, how they are applied to the right patients at the right time, in the right manner? So let me start with you, Christine, again.
Sure. So I just wanted to touch really quick on the cost of everything. I wanted to mention too that you have amazing patients or parents of patients on these calls who do a lot of these things for free. And so I just want to say that there is value to what people do. And I think we do have to realize that we have a whole untapped workforce of people who are living on disability who can do things for our industry. I think that there's things like, the lupus community has a PALS program where they have people who have been through clinical trials help other minorities get into clinical trials and guide them in that way. So I think if we're looking at cost, we should also consider the value of the patients and their experiences as well. And now I completely forgot your question on that. Was it the innovation?
Yes, it's what are the, no problem. What are the innovation or innovative changes that you see coming down, whether it's the ubiquity or the pervasiveness of data that's available, social media, being able to reach out to patients. Given that we're in this COVID environment, how do you interact with the community now?
Well, I think the first thing that everybody has to realize is that you have to get into these communities. You have to get to know these people. I think these people, I'm one of them, but I think that as an industry, we make judgments on what we think people value. And from a different standpoint of not someone living in that situation. I was just on a panel where we were discussing pain and function, and they were looking at levels, and people were saying pain and function are two completely different things to me. But we have people looking at results and looking at trials based on those together. So I think that incorporating that patient voice is a huge thing. I think looking at things like precision medicine and the whole genome sequencing and patients eventually maybe owning their data, right? Those types of things coming out, I think will benefit all of us.
That's a great point. Number one, patients owning their data, the precision medicine concept, genomic, the inclusion of genomic data, and the availability of genomic data, whether it's to researchers or to manufacturers. I think that's really key and important for them to kind of accelerate that development process and to be able to just provide the right level of access. Nadia, what are your thoughts?
So what we're actually tackling these issues within the rare advocacy movement. We've noticed the rare advocacy movement is not a nonprofit or a company. It's strictly advocacy leaders on the ground level that have come together to support a network. And that network is to address ground level issues in the community. And so what we've been finding is that the data that is being collected and extracted from us, it's being miscommunicated, misunderstood. A lot of the quality of life interpretations, like Kristen said, are also being misunderstood, being viewed in a way that the community would look at the same data and say, no, actually, this is what it is. And so we've decided to create pathways for the biopharmaceutical, the digital health space to access the community. And through programs like Rare 360 and the Our Lives Matter DEI programs. And so that way, if those that in the biopharmaceutical space that are truly understand the importance of having unadulterated insights that are not filtered through a lens, that, that then there's several lenses right now, that they can actually access the community finally and start, because even when you look at the Tufts report, you actually see that the percentage of failures for recruitment goals went up. Like we are actually worse. We partnered and we became more patient-centric, but we're not meeting our recruitment goals. So we're making mistakes in the industry. I talk more about it at 1 p.m. So
this is really important because I come from a data analytics point of view. We rely on claims data, we rely on EMR, EHR data. But one thing that we have to understand is that the data collected in a clinician's office is incorrect. It doesn't truly represent the health state of an individual because they are only collecting data for reimbursement. So unless you go deep into the notes and the clinical notes and you really understand what the physician is thinking and what the physician is observing, what you're doing, Nadia, is really important because you're getting the patient's voice. You're understanding what they're actually going through, not the multiple filters that are applied to their state of health to reimbursement for other objectives. So that's really important. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to Sam.
Hi, and perfect timing. The leaf blowers have just started outside my house, so if there's any noise, I apologize. But I suppose I come at this from looking, because I work with so many different pharmaceutical companies and I have worked in many different therapeutic areas, in terms of exciting developments I see is the idea of personalized medicine and gene therapies and CAR T-cell therapies. We're crossing a boundary into a new era of medicine. And it's incredibly fascinating and interesting and inspiring that there's these medicinal approaches which are changing away from your typical, API manufactured pharmaceutical, old school medicine, essentially, derivatives of Chinese medicine, essentially, to a genetic approach. And that, to me, is incredibly, having worked on a large scale gene therapy access program for SMA, in fact, right now that we run, it's fascinating to see the impact that gene therapy is having, and to see that come to life in my lifetime is amazing. And the more and more we work with different companies and we see, for example, Luxturna coming along and launched, it's fascinating and it really motivates me to think, okay, we're on the cusp, I think, of something quite massive. And if companies, the challenge will be with these therapies is, especially one-time hit therapies is, how do you calculate reimbursement and value for a product that you only have one time to charge for? So Zolgensma, $2.2 million upfront, which payer is going to be happy with paying that upfront with the not having the long-term, outlook as to how they're going to respond? So I would say that would be my summary: gene therapies and CAR T-cell therapies. Yeah.
And that's great. That's a great point. And do you see an acceleration? We've heard about Novartis's CAR T, you've heard about Luxturna, you've heard about SMA from various manufacturers. Do you see an acceleration of gene therapies being put out on the market, or do you see a stagnation? Or what's your view in terms of the rate of gene therapies being put out on the market?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that I'm seeing an acceleration. There are lots and lots of gene therapies in preclinical stage. I think companies are testing the water with it, right? They see what Novartis and Avexis have done, etc., and they're applying caution to the challenges they've faced and the reimbursement challenges they've faced. But I think there are so many more companies now looking into gene therapy as a potential avenue for treatment, or for a number of different diseases. And every day I hear of a genetic approach to a new type of disease. So I think they definitely are, but I think they're moving forwards with the idea with gusto. But I think they definitely are applying caution because of that reimbursement perspective. It's a challenge. So that would be my summary.
And this is where I think the US model and the non-US model would come into play. So, for example, in the UK, where you have national health, this doesn't become an issue. Where you have a one-time therapy. I mean, it's great for this for the system. Whereas in the US, it becomes less of a beneficial factor for the payer, and more of a an issue that they haven't dealt with in the past. So that's where the
although I would say that the UK, for example, with nationalized health services, it completely disrupts your budget as a payer. Yes, and then if you're saying, well, now I've got to find $2 million per patient, and I've got to support the rest of the economy with only X amounts of money, which is the challenge,
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And then, there are other value-based contracts and so forth that other companies have applied in other countries that can be applied here to get a reimburse if it doesn't work, reduce the cost, negotiate the cost, and so forth. But let's have Crystal comment on the innovative changes that she sees.
I actually think there's going to be a couple of areas that are really exciting. I think that GPT-3 as an open source combined with quantum computing, such as Google's Sycamore, is going to open up a whole new frontier for the rare disease community, where individuals can actually become citizen scientists and start driving research and data collection. I firmly believe that within the next few years, we're going to see a high school kid for their science project identify a treatment for a rare disease with an unmet need. And that gives me chills.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about that.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
And then on the other avenue, I'm also a member of the Texas Newborn Screening Advisory Committee. And I think that we're going to see massive changes on how we diagnose rare disease patients. We cannot treat what we don't diagnose. And the way that we're working now is we get a treatment approved and then we go into a phase of patient finding. That's
Right.
very ineffective because all that data that we need to secure the approval, we need those patients. So it doesn't make any sense to wait until the end. So I do believe that programs like Project Baby Bear, and we are following that with Project Baby Dillo in Texas, and Texas Rare Alliance is working on leading the advocacy movement for that, will help open the door to whole genome sequencing. And then when we look at our newborn screening programs, they're 30 years old. That's not that old. And we're not even screening for 1% of the rare diseases. And yet these laboratories are taxed and they are out of space. So I believe that we will have to go to newborn whole genome sequencing. And even if we're only returning panel that are RUSP conditions, that's going to free up a lot of space and manpower for those laboratories to help diagnose new conditions. And it's important because currently there are 300 conditions that qualify for inclusion on the RUSP, but for the fact they don't have an approved genetic test. And those tests require pilot studies, and those command 2 years and $2 to $4 million. So that's a lot of resources that is really just being thrown into the wind, because if we use something like newborn whole genome sequencing, then that funding could be reallocated to developing additional treatments for conditions with unmet needs.
No, that's great. And I'm really glad you brought up the disruptive factor that you have things like quantum computing, that you have things like the citizen researcher, GPT-3, and that brings to light the non-traditional drug discoverers, meaning organizations like Google, Microsoft, they all have the ability and the resources. They have unlimited computing resources. They have the ability to hire the researchers, the physicians, the clinicians. So rather than having the top, 25 pharma, you might have a disruptive technology company that comes in and be able to apply AI for drug discovery using quantum computing. So these are all, and these are all.
I don't think that it might happen. I think that it will happen. I think it's the Moneyball approach, and I think it's the tactic that we have to take to make it more economical.
That's right. And then the discovery phase, if you are using quantum computing or some other advanced computing or AI techniques, you're reducing by years the amount of time it takes to do the discovery R&D of that drug, and then it becomes a clinical trial. So you reduce your costs right up front. And if you choose a clinical trial property, it reduces that cost. All right, thank you. So let me go to Crystal. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go to Kristen.
I don't know how you get tongue-tied with Christine, Crystal, Kristen. I'll be real quick on this one. I'm just going to say that what I see is the biggest thing happening, one of the biggest things happening, in addition to everything everybody's already mentioned so far, is that patients are truly what I see for the first time making their decisions and getting engaged out of education and not desperation anymore, which is opening what needs to happen is collaboration with them. And we've all touched on different ways that we're doing that. But that is what I see as one of the biggest things that is going to move this sucker forward in better ways, because it isn't desperate anymore. Now it's like, I've got my information because of all these different mechanics, and let's collaborate together to make this meaningful and work.
Very good. Thank you. We have about 6 minutes left. So this last topic is insights and recommendations for those preparing to go to market. So if you can lightly touch on that in the next few minutes, let's do that. Christine? So what is a go-to-market approach and what is a go-to-market recommendation?
From my perspective, to make sure you are involving everybody that would be involved in this from the very beginning. And so consider those patient voices, consider them experts, consider even the people that are doing your marketing when you're planning these things, because to come to them later and make these changes also costs money. So I think those, like Kristen said, those relationships, open communication, and just making sure these patients have a voice and that they're educated, right? We're no longer living in a space where people are blaming their diseases. They're now coming out saying, okay, I have this, what can I do better? So
thank you. Thank you. Nadia?
So is your question referencing post phase 3 or?
Correct. Like what's your go-to market? Yeah.
So it would, well, at that point, hopefully you did engage the community,
Yes.
but if you didn't, you're actually fighting an uphill battle of understanding how to communicate now with the community. If you've gone that far in the scientific aspect, now it's understanding the dynamics, understanding the language, developing content that actually resonates with all people of the rare disease community, not just the currently siloed ones in the advocacy space. And so it's super important that you engage with different people that are actually working on diversification of the content.
Excellent. Thank you. Sam?
I would have to stand up for expanded access here because I'm such an advocate for this, in that, your best go-to-market strategy is if you've got a product with data that's compelling and you're intending to file, make it available through expanded access. You have no excuse. You can collect real-world data that may be useful for payer purposes. You're building awareness with KOLs, advocacy, and payers ahead of any potential launch. I would say it's now a vital step in the clinical trial to commercialization step. You should have phase 3-4 studies, expanded access, and then launch. That's the way I petition it. And it's just an incredible opportunity to boost awareness and do a great thing for the unmet medical need in a community once you have a product that's showing efficacy and safety data. And you really do have a duty of care as a pharmaceutical company to make a program available. And you shouldn't be afraid of doing that. Be bold for the patients.
Thank you. And Crystal, you're in a unique position to kind of give your view in the go-to-market phase.
Yeah, so I think that the FDA has done some great work on this. I believe their draft guidance that they issued in 2018 on payer communications really is pointing us in the right direction. I don't think it's serving us to wait more towards the end to have those payer discussions. The door's been opened. I think even at phase 1, we need to start reaching out to the payers and have those discussions early and have them often. And because the manufacturers are having them, I think that it's also critical that the patient advocates do as well. We have patient advocacy committees with manufacturers. I think that we need to push to have the same for the payers as well. Because again, we're securing approval of a treatment, and then we're going and we're fighting uphill battles with those payers. And really, it's too little too late at that point. We need to be doing that work up front.
No, that's really important. We've done, a number of studies where to justify the cost of that therapy to the payer and to a government body. So I think you're absolutely right. That should be done up front. That should be set up so you don't have the post-launch discussion like you had with some of the other therapies that are out there, where everybody's kind of shocked that, this costs so much or we're going to charge so much. That you're absolutely right. We should have that discussions very early. Thank you. And Kristen?
I'll just say on top of all those things that the through line of the entire process has to be respect. Respect for the patient, respect for the patient community, respect for what it is that is important to them, meaningful, and carry that all the way through all of those stages.
Thank you. So, these are the 3 topics we wanted to discuss. We have about a minute. Anything anything else that you see that would be disruptive in this market that would move the cause of the rare disease patient population forward? And leave it open to anybody to kind of jump in.
So,
Go ahead, Nadia.
We just recently, through the Rare 360 program, actually defined the different types of advocates, because industry needs to understand there are different types. There's different levels, there's different types of skill sets and expertise. And so the one that everyone strives to be is the comprehensive rare disease advocacy expert that can navigate between different rare disease communities and utilize experiences from the former engagements into the current engagements. And so understanding the evolving ecosystem of the rare disease environment is essential to engaging.
Good, thank you. Anybody else?
I was going to just bring up the conversation you and I had yesterday about the potential for maybe with clinical trials offering them to people when you enroll in a health system instead of doing it when it's end stage of their disease, when they're just looking for answers. And maybe when you are of sound mind, be able to sit down and say, I would be willing to participate in a trial before you have any exclusions or comorbidities that are going to take you out of the trial. So
very good, thank you.
Just a thought on that.
Thank you. And we're at time, unfortunately, but I thank you all for being on the panel. This is a really interesting discussion. It really gave us, I think, gave at least me a lot of insights as to the patient voice, the underlying technologies, and what the access issues are. So I thank you all for being on this panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good to
Very
see you
much.
all.
Thank you. And
Thank
please
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Please tune in for the rest of the presentations for today. We'll see you all lately. Thank you.
I always hate leaving these things.
You just